Divine Rise. Blessed be to your day, grand rising, good morning, because some of us need a good morning because there's some things that we need to actually kill off. I was thinking, always being really analytical with myself. And this week in the podcast, we got into compelling assumptions, or living in the assumptions, and we broke down through the imitation of flattery, integrating with the shadow, and assassinating the need for emotional cues. And it made me think, as we're building out throughout the weeks, we've been talking about everything you're not dealing with is what creates your space. So it made me think about a lot of us, due to not dealing with our emotions, we have what I like to call omission, deflection, disorder. Out of sight, out of mind. That means as long as I don't think about it, as long as I don't bring it to the surface, as long as I don't say it, we'll say things like to ourselves of, don't put that out there into the universe. Don't say this. Don't put it out in the universe. Don't say that. That's something. It's this omission effect. It's this, we like to omit things. I broke down in one of the segments in the podcast to where until I admitted to myself my avoidance wounds that were developed through my mother's avoidance wounds, I noticed that because remember, the past, the present, and the future are all in the same continuous motion. They're all feeding off the same frequency. So as long as I omitted, from this state of omission, that means not admitting that I had avoidance issues, not admitting that I had these wounds, not admitting to myself, rather omitting. I always wondered why my space didn't end up the way that I was trying to make it. And I've said it before, your space, your environment, everything around you is not based on what you have dealt with. It's based on what you do not deal with. Your space, our environment, everything that's going on in your life is based on that theory of, if you're thinking about positive, you got to deal with the negatives. And when you're thinking about the negatives, when you're trying to keep everything positive and everything negative comes up, and then every time you're thinking about everything negative, everything positive comes up, that's the aspect of omission. That's when you're omitting things. That's when you're not dealing with what you need to deal with. You're not getting to the source. You're not getting to the source of the matter. Instead, for me, when I was in a lot of spaces with myself, I would omit what it truly was that was bothering me. So I would deflect from what was really bothering me. I would dismiss what was really what I was really dealing with. And then the expectancy inside of my space usually boiled down to, see, nobody understands me, nobody gets me, nobody understands me. Every time I need help, but I had to really be honest with myself that the reason why is because I wasn't saying anything. I wasn't being direct. I wasn't saying anything. I wasn't being direct. A lot of times when we're stuck in this omission or omitting parts of our story, all of that comes into your space. It's like, use the simplest example. Go on Google business telephone lines, or Google something on Google, and then immediately it pops up on your timeline. That is the best way to explain your potential energy or the potential lessons within your space. Remember, the universe, your higher self, whatever you want to deem it in your path, does not give to what you are. It does not give to what you want to be. It gives to what you are. Therefore, you can now you're going through your experiences in order to become what it is in your authentic self. So a lot of times when we're in this omission process, we're omitting things in your space. It physically manifests as clutter. It manifests as that friend. It manifests as that relationship. It manifests as the relationship problems. It manifests as the problems you're having with your friends. It manifests in the form of the aspects of your family. They're just the physical conduits. They're just the physical conduits. That person, place, thing, or idea, whatever it may be, that's just a physical conduit of the emotions that you have not dealt with. The wound that you have not dealt with. Similar to when we think about our chakra system. You're thinking about, oh my God, I feel something inside of my root chakra. I got to clear it out. You have to address what it is in your space because it's showing up in your space. That's the key of you coming into that alignment. Your first levels of your alignment. If I say, for example, knowing what my root chakra is, knowing that it's based in the grounding aspects, the sexual aspects, or my sacred energy in that basis of what I'm grounded in, my survival. So now if I say and I address that I feel this weight in my root chakra, or my root chakra is out of balance, now I am admitting to myself, that's the first part of acknowledging, now I'm accepting or admitting everything that it can possibly be. Every possibility, every probability. I know what it is. Even if I say that I don't know what it is, I know exactly what it is. I know I got to deal with some shit. I know I'm rooted in some old aspects. That's why every time that I try to find myself trying to sow a new idea or try to sow some new seeds, it continuously comes up as the same thing. The fruit keeps coming up, the same fruit. I'm planting in that aspect. I'm planting a mango tree and I keep getting lemons. It's because I'm still rooted in the things that basically made me sour. The things that were acidic. These aspects that were in my life that I'm not dealing with. It doesn't matter what you do, because you can get it all day. You can say, I got it out the mud. I can go get it. The hustler mentality. You can say that all day. It doesn't matter what you can go receive. It depends on how you're able to keep it. That's all in the aspects of how you radiate your energy. If I'm talking about I want to have a peaceful sanctuary, and I'm at peace, but every time that I'm at peace and it feels weird, I go run off somewhere to where it's chaotic. That means my root, my source for my energy is based on something being chaotic. That way, so when I come back to the house, I can say at least my house is peaceful. So now I'm literally running my ass around into these chaotic situations. And then when it gets too heavy, I want to start omitting the aspects I need to learn. I go run back to my house and go hide. I used to do these things. I used to do these things all of the time in the aspects of using in the maternal aspect. I was still longing for something. I was still based on what I was in the definition of what I said my mother was in this example, what I said my mother was and what I wanted my mother to be. And if I was not admitting to myself that I needed to learn that aspect of myself, naturally in my space, I created, because you're always creating it, I created in my space the reason to still need or try to go get that from my mother. Some of the aspects, what I broke down in the podcast this week, I remember my money issues or the money issues / emotional issues and the ways that I used money to manipulate my space based on my avoidance and my rejection wounds. That means I had them heavy rejection wounds and avoidance wounds. The way that I had to get to that source to deal with how I was using my power and my energy source in that space was I had to admit that I was of my mother. I was of the conduits of my mother. That was a part of my soul. That was a part of my soul contract. That's something that I needed to deal with. Because until I dealt with it, my mother served as the past. My mother served as the past. Coming through that emotional gateway, coming through that womb, based in avoidance, based in the seat that she sat in, when I was created, when I came through that space, in my present, in order for me to exist, because there's a big difference between you living and you existing. In order for me to exist in success, in order for me to exist in the success that I said that I wanted, it was always based on something physical. The same way that my mother did it. The same way that my family, the same way that my mother did it, sisters did it, brothers did it, cousins, great-great-grandmother, great-great-great-grandmother, grandfather, going all the way back down the line. The same way that they survived. I was rooted in the survival complex, and it developed into the womb. It developed into that emotional tether. So until I dealt with that aspect, every time, it didn't matter what I received. When it came time for my shit to reach that energy to cycle and bring it back into balance, I would call myself running from the chaos or avoiding the chaotic factor, avoiding the lesson that I needed to learn. All because I was omitting that part of my story. I was omitting what I said and then wondering to myself, it's similar to you sitting there saying that, man, I hate my job. You say you hate your job. Now everything in your space, everything in that space is going to give you a reason to hate it. Now you hate your job. Now everything in your space is going to give you a reason to hate it. But the longer that you'll tell yourself, I'm only doing this for the paycheck. So now you inside of the space, since you're only doing it for the paycheck, you're creating your environment because you hate your job. That means you have a distaste for your job. That means you really don't want to work. So then you wonder down the line when your hours get cut, you set that up. Your space imitates and flatters to your ego. If it's flattering your ego. When you're stuck in that aspect of omitting these things in your life and not dealing with those things, everything in your space imitates to flatter your ego or to flatter your behavior. That's that flattery with your behavior. Everything in your space is a projection from your shadow. So until you integrate with your shadow, so naturally, if everything in your space is based on the imitation of happiness, the imitation of love, the imitation of your peace, the imitation of your abundance, the imitation of these things, then naturally, you're going to stay separated from your shadow. So your shadow continues to operate the way that it's operating. You keep doing the same things that you're doing. You keep living out your day, the same day, every single day, with some different events. Really think about it. Really take that moment. It's time to start admitting to yourself. Is it really what you're saying that it is? Or is it based on the assumption, based on you trying to maintain that behavior? You're still trying to do things the old way. But you saying you want to be the new you. The old measurements are always going to leave you cut up short. And you're noticing it more and more now. You're noticing it more and more now in your life. You keep using the same units of measure, and then you're wondering why you keep coming up short. It's because you're using the old units of measure. I was using the old units of measure I was using the old standards of measurements, the way I used to measure my success, the way I used to measure the love, the way I used to measure love, the way I used to measure my peace, the way I used to measure out all of these aspects. I was using the old measurements, the old values. And then I wondered why in my current, I was ending up short. And then when I really started, like, you know what? That's why I keep coming up short. Because I'm using the old units of measure. Where did I learn to use these old units of measure? Why do I keep giving my power away? I keep giving my power away to something. What do I keep giving it away to? What am I not admitting to myself? Maybe I am like my mother. Maybe I am of my mother. I am of my father. I am of the aspects that I omit from the story of my father. I am from the aspects of what I omitted from the story of my mother. I am the aspects of what I omitted from what I'm trying to omit from my story now. That's the only thing that's creating my space. So once I dealt with those things and started doing that internal, my shadow work, doing that deep work, going into those corridors and acknowledging those multiple eyes that were looking at me that I didn't want to face, everything started changing. That's your potential. Your potential is going to be behind what you keep omitting. Your potential is always is behind what you keep omitting. The things you keep omitting and keep leaving out. And if you do that, then if you're leaving your past in shambles and disarray, then your current space is going to be in shambles and disarray. Because all you're doing is emitting. All you're doing is emitting from that space. It's setting you up. You always have one or two choices. You got one or two choices in this whole aspect. Either you're going to evolve or you're going to keep repeating the same thing. You're going to get to a point with yourself. Is one of the key aspects. You're going to get to a point with yourself to when you realize that all you're doing is replacing light bulbs. All you're doing is replacing light bulbs. Whether it's friends, family, the job, relationship, whatever it may be. Whatever physical conduit it may be. All you're doing is replacing a light bulb. And it's still feeding from the same frequency and it burns out the same exact way. Don't matter what the light bulb is. Until you get in tune with your energy, those emotional aspects that you keep omitting, you're not admitting to yourself. Until you start doing this work, your environment will remain the exact same to sustain your behavior. You want to change your environment? Address your behavior. You want to learn how to move through time? Address those emotions. I've said it before. A lot of you are stuck in 1996. A lot of you are stuck in 1992, in the 90s, where it happened. A lot of you are stuck in that space. So now all you can do is emit at a frequency based on those aspects. You want love, but you keep getting fear. You want love, but you keep getting fear-based narratives. You angry, you're in fear. You're sad, you're in fear. You have hatred, you're in fear. You have prejudice, bias, you're in fear. You're in fear. So you create the space based on fear. That's what you keep projecting. It's time to admit to yourself. On this week's on the God Hour podcast, we got even deeper into that aspect about the compelling assumptions, the imitation of flattery, the results of not integrating with your shadows, and what happens when you do not assassinate your need for emotional cues in order for you to continue reacting the way that you're reacting. It's out now. Spotify, iTunes, Breaker, Google Podcasts, everywhere podcasts are played at, except for Tidal. That's okay. But I want you to be the best. I want you to take this moment because it's your moment. It's time to stop omitting what you need to work on and start admitting. I got one more question. I made the post. If you could go back to your 18-year-old self, your 12-year-old self, your 11-year-old self, if you can go back to your inner child, which you need to, what 3 words, you only got 3 words you can tell them. What would you tell them? Let it marinate. I love you. We love us. Ashe.